share.
Dovete rientrare nella call con l'account e così.
So you're just, you know, while you're just fixing the technical glitches, I'm very happy to be introducing the two keynote speakers. And one of them I'm especially happy to be introducing you to, which is Ingrid Koetze, that I'm very honored to be working with at ICLEI. She is director of Biodiversity, Nature and Health, which is a network of subnational governments for sustainability. Ingrid has more than 40 years experience in sustainability, advocacy, and governance, and she has worked for national, subnational, and city governments, and her book specifically focuses on biodiversity, advocacy, and mainstreams nature and its benefits into urban planning and decision making. That's why this very session is very absolutely aligned and connected with what Ingrid is going to be talking on. She works for the ICLEI biodiversity advocacy stream, which of course includes the conventional biological biodiversity processes, but also the World Coastal Forum, Clean Action Coalition, as well as the UNEP Major Groups Facilitating Committee. Now,
hey, Stefania, please wait my signal to start, because we cannot. I just can hear you, and the audience cannot hear you. So
the audience cannot hear me.
Yeah. So wait my signal.
Right.
So seems that we solved the problem. So just the time to restore the on-room connection. And also for the speaker of the next session. Now we will go with the first keynote of Ingrid Koetze, and then we will finish one moment the previous session that was interrupted by the technical problem, and then we continue with the part 2 of domain 2. So just a little bit of patience.
So Domenico, do you want me to introduce Ingrid, or should I just let the speaker?
No, I will tell you. I just explain to the audience.
Okay,
I will give you the signal when to start.
Fantastic.
Stefania, you can start and introduce Ingrid. And Ingrid, please make your speech. Thank you very much for the patience.
Okay, no, thank you so much. I will be very quick because I know that Ingrid's calendar in the agenda is quite packed, and she carved it out for this very keynote speech. So I will shortly introduce her. And as I was saying before, I'm very happy to be introducing Ingrid Koetze myself, as I have the honor to be working with her. Ingrid is the director of biodiversity, nature, and health at ICLEI. ICLEI is a network of subnational government for sustainability, and she has really a long-standing experience, more than 40 years in sustainability advocacy and governance, and she very much focusing on how biodiversity advocacy and mainstreaming nature and its benefit then can really impact positively to the urban planning and decision making for cities to become healthier, greener, and then more resilient. She focuses very much on the advocacy work of ICLEI, and she's very much involved in all the institutional relevant and connected biodiversity processes, such as the World Coastal Forum, Clean Action Coalition, and the UNEP Major Groups Facilitating Committee. So the focus of this part 2 is nature-based solution, and you couldn't really have a better speaker than Ingrid, and she will specifically give very good examples from her experience in Africa, but also globally about what the multidimensional approach means. Please, Ingrid, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's a real honor to be here today at this very impressive audience. And I had the opportunity to listen to some of the previous speakers. I just want to say that I'm not a scientist and I'm not a medical practitioner. As Stefania has indicated, I work in the space where cities operate, and I'm going to try and share with you some of the learnings that we have from ICLEI in this field. So I just want to get my slide to move on. I think that when the pandemic hit, I think the world had a huge wake-up call, and the pandemic exposed a lot of inequalities. It exposed a lot of vulnerabilities. For the first time, I think we became aware globally of how vulnerable some of the communities around the world are. Thinking about things such as food security, health insecurity, rising debt, even conflicts. And in my part of the world, we were also very aware of the technological inequalities. Often people in this part of the world don't have that good connection. I think one of the things that we all learned through the pandemic was to become more aware and more appreciative of digital platforms and things. And it was interesting that in the beginning of this year, when the UNEA, the member states met again, there was a draft resolution that came from the Africa group that spoke to the issue of green recovery. And it emphasized the need for mutual benefits and co-benefits at the social, economic, and environmental level, and talked about resilience of communities, talked about green approaches, talked about reducing microbial infections, etc., but also around innovation, technology, etc. And out of the UNEA meeting earlier this year, there were several actually resolutions that speak to this issue of animal welfare, nature, and people. I've identified some of them here. I'm not going to go into them in much detail. I'm sure that you are all familiar with them. The most obvious one being the animal welfare, environment, and sustainable development nexus. But there's also one that talks about nature-based solutions for supporting sustainable development. And one of the lessons that we learned from the pandemic is that human health and environmental health and animal health are central to achieving the SDGs. And what this particular resolution does, it speaks to this link between pollution, biodiversity loss, climate change, land degradation, human health and well-being, and nature-based solutions, opportunity to solve in a very innovative way a lot of these challenges. And the other point it makes is that it's essential, if we're going to meet our SDGs, that we need to address the social, economic, and environmental challenges together. And they place the role that cities can play insofar as urban development and a whole range of things, including human health, is concerned, quite central in the resolution. There's also a very important resolution on biodiversity and health, and this one particularly focuses on the One Health approach, and it comes up with a number of calls, as it were, to member states, from things as diverse as looking at the trade in wildlife and food markets. In my part of the world, this is something that's very important. In other parts of the world, not necessarily such an important thing. But what they also do is look at how one can mainstream nature and look at the loss of ecosystems and ensuring ecosystem resilience to prevent future health risks, including things such as disease outbreaks that are either epidemic or pandemic in scale. And one of the things that we've seen as our climate changes and we have more extreme weather events is an increase in, for example, waterborne diseases, but also in airborne diseases, particularly, for example, as a result of air pollution. And cities are really important role players in this because they make decisions and they set up infrastructure and they have development programs that are, on the one hand, affected by all of these factors, but on the other hand, can also influence and affect how we manage these challenges and these risks to human, animal, and ecosystem health. So then looking a little bit further back at the Convention on Biological Diversity, already 2 COPs ago, at COP 13, they approved a decision around biodiversity and human health, where the parties to that convention recognized that there are benefits to human health from biodiversity. And this was as wide as nutrition, medicines, but also sort of human health and well-being, and that particularly in the urban environment, nature can play a big role in contributing to well-being, for example, creating space for physical exercise, improving health, mental health, which is something that as a result of the COVID pandemic has become an increasing factor. At the next COP in Egypt in 2018, there was another decision on health and biodiversity, this time calling for a global action plan. And in the current COP, which is going to be taking place in Montreal later this year, and in December, there's in fact one of the targets, one of the 23 targets in the 2030 action targets for the new global biodiversity framework, which parties will adopt, speaks specifically to this point of access to quality green and blue spaces in urban and densely populated areas, and links it to ecological connectivity, to human health and well-being being improved by such spaces. And this is a particularly important target. It happens to be one of the few targets that enjoys a lot of support and consensus from all parties, just to give you an indication of how important it is. And I want to take now a little bit of a step back into or away from the policy frameworks and look at what is happening in cities and why I call for or make the recommendations that cities can be agents of One Health approaches. For example, in the pictures that you have in front of you, these are parks from all over the world, from the very famous natural areas in Singapore, to there's one from India and also various African cities. And it's really been interesting to see how over the past 4 or 5 years, the interest and the understanding of how important these green spaces, these lungs in cities are, and how cities are investing more time and more effort into making new parks and expanding those that they already have. One of these cities, and I would like to just share with you a case study here, is Dar es Salaam. Now, Dar es Salaam happens to be one of the fastest growing cities in Africa. It is a city that is literally bursting at its seams. It can't keep up with its migration into the city. So a lot of the planning is very outdated. They do have still some networks of open space, but they're not very well managed. Where they do have trees, such as on the right-hand side, these are in the older areas, not necessarily in the new areas. And they approached ICLEI and asked for help because they have an issue in the sense that they understand they need more green spaces, but they don't know where to invest the little bit of money that they do have. So what we did was, through an exercise of co-design and co-production with the city officials, planners, parks experts, health experts, as well as community people, we identified the sort of pressure points in the cities where there were challenges with polluted water or heat island effects, or areas where there was no greenery. And we did an overlay of the available ecosystem services, in other words, where we did have a bit of natural habitat and natural vegetation. And using a very innovative mapping and ecosystem valuation process, we've come up with what we call the thematic atlas for Dar es Salaam, which combines physical challenges as well as ecosystem services, such as they are. And you can see here, for example, on the left hand, we drew up a map of where the main sort of transport corridors were, and these also overlay with the areas where they had the most problems with heat island effect and air pollution. And we then, and you can see that's the bit of in the top right hand corner, the bit of that's in red, and we showed them where they've got still green areas. And together with the city, we're working on a plan to help them invest the little bit of resources that they do have into areas where they can optimize the natural vegetation to alleviate things such as flood losses and heat island effect. Another example comes also from Africa, and this is the city of Lilongwe, where they had a really big problem with a river. It's the Lilongwe River. It was an area that was on both sides, had a lot of informal markets, and you can see in the pictures there's a lot of flooding, there's a lot of waste on the river edges. People are doing washing in the water that's very polluted. So it was an area that was characterized by a lot of tension between the city itself as well as the official the stakeholders, because actually this part had on the map and on the plan, land use plan, had been earmarked as an area for urban parks. And what we did through a facilitation process and using a whole range of different methodologies was to get the stakeholders, the people that work in the markets, the residents that live around, to talk to the local authority. And instead of evicting people and causing further conflict and tensions, we came up with a way in which they used, because a lot of the waste in many of the African cities, in fact, between 60 and 70% is organic waste. And we found a way in which we could use that organic waste to create compost, and with a compost, develop food gardens and urban agriculture projects. And as a result, what has happened now in Lilongwe, as you can see here in the top left-hand corner, that's where they're starting to identify where the waste is, and they're starting to gather all the waste that had sort of clogged up the river and under the walkways, the bridges. And on the other two pictures, you can see where the riverine habitat has been restored as a result of both urban agriculture projects using the urban the waste from the organic waste to create compost, but also restoring the natural vegetation along the river. And this particular project has resulted in not just creating livelihoods and securing the river and its ecosystems and cleaning the water, but also improved relationships between the city and the local residents. Johannesburg, I live in South Africa. This is one of the cities in my country where similar problems, people had encroached on the river as a result of housing needs. huge problems with flooding every year. Many of those houses would be washed away. Big problems with sanitation and wastewater. And at the time of drought, then obviously the people weren't able to use the water, polluted as it was. And we went through a whole program with the city where we developed, together with the local people, a plan to manage and to restore this particular catchment, and to develop ways in which to resolve many of those urban infrastructure and urban housing problems as well. Before I end off, I just want to show you one other thing that we do at ICLEI together with our partners. These include UNEP and WWF, IUCN, etc. We've created an online platform because we know that cities often have a need to share their lessons or to share their problems and find out how other cities are doing in the world. And this is where they can share their best practices. But we're also using it as a platform where cities can report on the actions they take with nature-based solutions to restore ecosystems and to protect biodiversity and to resolve many of the urban challenges that they're dealing with. And there is a particular category that looks, for example, at the health issue, looking at health and well-being, using natural areas and protecting them for mental health purposes, where people can recreate, where they can play, they can just spend time in nature and recharge their batteries, as it were. We already have almost 240 cities and regions around the world participating on this platform. You can see on the left hand, there's some of the cities that have been participating. Here is a very practical example, and this is the target that I was referring to just now, where the CBD is wanting to have this target around access to green and blue spaces. And in this particular case, it's a very small municipality in Uganda, which has already made a commitment to developing eco-friendly green home projects along the urban open spaces. They've got public outreach, public awareness. They're looking particularly at vulnerable communities. It's tree planting, and it's about greening the space and looking after the rivers. And so this is just a particular example of what's actually happening on the ground. We know about the great stories in New York and Singapore and London, but I wanted to show this example to show it's also happening in the small spaces in less developed countries amongst very vulnerable communities. And I'm going to say thank you with that. Just one last point to make, that ICLEI is going to be presenting and showcasing a lot of the work that cities do in relation to human health and well-being, nature, ecosystems at the CBD Conference of Parties in December this year. And we would really love to have something on One Health. We are hoping to have a session on One Health, and I certainly hope that coming from this very important international conference, we'll be able to have a summary of some of the outcomes and the really great findings from your conference. And I hope that you will keep touch with Stefania and myself so that we can profile the work around One Health as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. It's been, like always, a wonderful presentation. I know, Domenico, you won't come in, but I really want to just highlight the importance, the important work that ICLEI, through the Cities Biodiversity Center, Cities with Nature and Regions with Nature, is doing for really supporting cities and national governments and local governments into actioning nature and mainstreaming nature into their administration for also the health of citizens, of the communities, because at the end that's what we aim for, right? A better world for everybody. So that's the great work that I'm again, that I have the honor of working with Ingrid, and so happy that we could really share it with you.
Thank you.
You're